From to-do lists to personal budgets, general ledgers to business expense reports, people are busy creating all kinds of spreadsheets on a daily basis. If you want to build a spreadsheet that's accurate and easy to use and does what it's supposed to do, you'll need to understand the basics of using Excel. With the proper foundation of Excel knowledge, you'll know how to build your spreadsheets right the first time, know how to share them quickly, and even collaborate with others. Microsoft Excel has been helping people do just that for decades, but it's a powerful application that can seem intimidating at first glance. That's why we're going to start at the very beginning to set you on the right track. I'm David Rivers, and I've been teaching people how to get the most out of Microsoft Excel since it came into existence. Join me as we explore how Excel 2019 can help you work faster and easier as you create, edit, share, and even collaborate on time-saving and attractive-looking spreadsheets. Let's get started. Well, here's what you need to know to follow along with me in this course. Firstly, I'm working with an early version of Excel 2019. And because Excel is always being updated and improved, what you see on your screen may not always match exactly what appears on my screen. But not to worry, it shouldn't affect your ability to perform the tasks we'll be exploring. This course also comes with exercise files, a copy of the same files you'll see me working with on my computer. Now, if you have access to them and want to follow along with me step by step, download them to a convenient location such as your desktop. We'll take a closer look once we get started shortly. Lastly, this course is tailored to those who have never used any version of Microsoft Excel or are new to Excel 2019. So you won't need any experience with Excel to follow along with ease as we move through the chapters and movies in this course. Before we start using Excel 2019 to create great-looking spreadsheets, you need to know what Excel is and why you would use it. By definition, Excel is an electronic spreadsheet program. In other words, Excel is a software application that's used for the storing, organization, and manipulation of data. The data is entered into cells, which are organized into columns and rows. And that data can be either text, numbers, or formulas and functions. In Excel, a formula or function will typically be used to calculate data found in other cells. So who uses Excel? Well, quite often, Excel is used by those who work with financial data. Excel will be used to perform basic mathematical operations like totaling up columns or rows of data. It'll be used to find values such as profits or losses, or even the maximum or minimum values in a specified range of data. And other useful calculations include finding averages, number counts, and percentages. But performing calculations in Excel is only the tip of the iceberg. Excel is also often used to chart or graph data to make it easier for users to identify trends. And many continue to use Excel like a database program because it does have that functionality built in that makes it easy to sort and even filter data to find specific information. Excel also comes with many analytical tools to make analyzing data easy, such as pivot tables that allow you to view data from different perspectives. So that's what Excel 2019 is in a nutshell and what it can be used for. Now it's time to create your first spreadsheet and get comfortable in your surroundings. We'll do that next. Well, it's time now to launch Microsoft Excel 2019 and get comfortable in your surroundings. If you're following along with me, go ahead and launch the app. What you're going to see is the start screen, similar to what I'm looking at. It's broken up into two sides. On the left side is where we go to open up existing workbooks. We can browse around for them by clicking the link, Open Other Workbooks. You can be looking through your hard drive, network drives, anything that's connected, even the cloud from here. And if you've been working with Excel already, you're probably looking at a list of recent workbooks that you've been working with, and you can get back to them quickly from this list. If you're starting fresh like me, there's nothing there until you start creating and saving workbooks. That's what the other half of this screen is for, creating. And you can see there are a number of featured templates to help you get started, including this first one, the default, which is a blank workbook. That will allow you to start from scratch. But as we scroll down the featured list of templates, you'll see some tours and help options for pivot tables, formulas, etc. And then you'll start to see the actual templates. For example, you'll see planners and schedules, trackers, etc. Now, these are just the featured ones. There are really hundreds of templates to help you get started. You can see some different categories like business and personal, financial management. There's budgets, for example, and a search field to find exactly what it is you're looking for. Microsoft, as I mentioned, has hundreds of templates to help you get going. We're going to start from scratch though, so go down to Blank Workbook and click once. So this takes us to our brand new blank workbook. What you're going to see at the very top is book and the number 1 if you're getting started for the first time like me. Now, other things are going to look familiar if you've used Microsoft Office apps like the quick access toolbar, the ribbon, the various tabs across the top for context-sensitive functionality. It's down below where things look different with a spreadsheet application like Excel 2019. What you're going to see is a series of columns and a number of rows. The rows go way past what we can see, over 1 million, and the columns, same thing. They go on and on. Once they get to Z, they start over at AZ and so on. So you actually have hundreds of columns and millions of rows, lots of room to do your work. Down below, you'll see the current sheet has its own tab, and we can have multiple sheets by clicking the plus sign. For example, if you were doing monthly expense reports, you would have one for each month, and then maybe you'd have a 13th tab down below for the totals that would take figures from the various sheets and total them up on the overall revenue, expenses, invoices, you name it. Now, when you're ready to start working, you can see down in the bottom right-hand corner, there are different view buttons, and normal is the default view. But if you wanted to switch to page layout to get a feel for how things would print, for example, page break preview to see where the page breaks if you were to print. And then we see the zoom slider down below. Here's where we go to zoom in and out, and we can hit the minus sign to zoom out to see more columns and rows. Zoom in with the plus sign with each click. You can see we're bumping it up by 10%. Of course, you can click and drag this zoom slider as well, and there are other ways to zoom in and out. We'll leave it at 100%. So that's a quick tour of the user interface and our first workbook, our first empty sheet. It's time to start adding content. We'll talk about that next. Here in Excel, there are 3 different types of data you can add to a spreadsheet here in your workbook. You can add text, such as for labels. You can add numbers to be calculated. And lastly, you can add formulas. There are also functions which are built-in formulas already created for you. So those 3 can be entered into a spreadsheet. In this movie, we're going to focus on the text and the numbers. Now, as you can see, this is different than working with a word processing application where we see pages, for example, that would print out the way we see them on screen. Here, we're working with a spreadsheet made up of columns and rows. Some of those columns may not be wide enough. Some of the rows not tall enough. We'll talk all about how that works. Let's start, though, right here in cell A1. Every cell has its own address. Cell A1 is the very first one up here in the top left corner. Let's type in something that definitely won't fit in that cell and see what happens. We'll type in leaf and mortar. And as you can see, when we get past the border, it just continues on to the next cell. It's not actually in cell B1, and as we continue to type C and D, it's overlapping those cells because there's nothing in them. We're able to see what we're typing. So we'll continue. We'll leave a space, a dash, and a space, and just type in something like revenues 2019. And then in brackets, we'll add in millions USD, and then a closing bracket, and press Enter on your keyboard. As you can see, it does continue past column A all the way into column E, although if we went to any of those cells, they'd be empty. Let's check it out. Go to cell A1, just click there. You can see up here just above the various column headings is where we can go to make changes if we wanted to. So in here is where we do the editing, and as you can see, it's filled with all of our content. If we go to cell B1, just click in column B, row 1, you can see it's empty. Same thing with C, D, and E. If we wanted to add anything to those cells, what we see currently would get cut off. It'd still be there, we just wouldn't be able to see it. And would have to start adjusting things like column widths, which we will get to a little bit later. For now, though, let's continue typing in some content. Let's leave a couple of blank rows here, and we'll go to, how about C4? Column C, row 4, you can see how they're shaded. Let's just start typing. We'll type in the short form for January, Jan. Hit your tab key. That's one way to quickly move left to right. Type in Feb, hit Tab, type in MAR. This time press Enter, and it wraps back down around underneath January, where we could continue typing if we wanted to. Let's go over here to cell A4 and type in location. Now hit Enter, and hit Enter again. Takes us down to row 6. So we're in cell A6 now, ready to continue typing. And in case you don't know where you are, when you click in a cell, we do see that shading to help remind us, but it's also up here in the top left-hand side in the name box. Okay, so we'll go back to A6, clicking there. Let's type in some locations like Canada, press Enter. We'll type in United States. That's not going to fit, but we won't worry about it. Press Enter. Europe, and lastly, Asia. Now hit Enter a couple of times because down here is where we want to see totals for January, February, and March. We'll type in totals and a colon like so. So what we have right now is simple text. And as you can see in each cell, it's left aligned. Everything's lined up on the left. That's the default alignment, things that can be adjusted. And we'll do all of these things as we move through the movies and chapters in this course. Let's go to cell C6. That's under January to the right of Canada. Let's type in some numbers now and see what happens. Remember, this is in millions of dollars US, so we'll type in 2.95. Hit your Tab key to go to February. Notice how numbers are right aligned by default. Let's type in 2.99. Tab over to March and type in 3.02. When we hit Enter, you can see it takes us back down to the next row under January where we can continue typing. So 3.11, we'll tab over. 3.05 if you're following along. 3.44 for March. And we'll fill in Europe and Asia as well. When you get to the last number, just press Enter and it's locked in. So all the numbers are lined up nicely on the right. That comes in handy when you see columns of numbers with decimals like we have. Of course, we can format those numbers to look like dollar amounts if we wanted to, and a number of other different options we'll discuss later. Right now we have our contents. What we don't have are the formulas that are going to work with those numbers. We'll get to those next, but just before we do, we need to save our changes. So let's go up to the Save button up here on the Quick Access toolbar. Control-S is your keyboard shortcut. If this already had a name, clicking this would simply update it, saving the changes. If it doesn't, it's the same as going to File down below and choosing Save As. You can see Save As down here. But we'll hit the back arrow and just click the Save button. It's fastest. There's Save As. You can see how it took us right to it. And now it's just time to choose where we want to save it. We can go down to Browse. Let's click Browse, and let's browse to the desktop. We'll put it right on the desktop. How about? Book 1 is the name by default, but of course we can change that. And it will be saved by default as an Excel workbook with the extension XLSX. That's the newest format. So let's type in a name like LM as in leaf and mortar, revenues, like so. Click Save, and that's going to show up here at the very top of our screen. And every time we make adjustments or changes to this, we can now click the Save button to update those changes, saving along the way. So that's part of what we can add to a workbook here in Excel: text, numbers. Next, it's the calculations, the formulas and functions that will work with the contents we've added. We'll do that next. Well, if you've been following along, we've created our new workbook. We've started on our first sheet, adding in text and numbers. The next logical step is to insert some formulas or functions that will perform calculations on the numbers we've entered. That's what we're going to do in this movie with our leaf and mortar revenue sheet here. If you're catching up, just go up to the File tab, go down to Open, click Browse to navigate to the exercise files. In there, in Chapter 1, double-click that one, you'll find LM Revenues 0104. Select that one and click Open, and you'll be all caught up. All right, the next thing we want to do is total up numbers in each of these columns. So let's start with our January figures here. We'll click in cell C11. That's next to totals under January. There are different ways to insert formulas or functions, but they all start the same way, and that is with the equal sign. Go ahead and hit the equal sign. Now, whatever we type here is going to be part of a formula. That's what the equal sign means. So you might be tempted to start typing in the numbers you see up above, like 2.95 plus 3.11, and so on. When you get all four numbers and press enter, you'll get the right answer. Problem is, if we go back and change any of these numbers, the total will not change. It won't be reflected. So there's a better way. Backspace to take out those numbers and leave the equal sign. What we really want is the contents of cell C6 plus the contents of C7, C8, and C9. So that's exactly what we can type. Go ahead, type in C6, a plus sign, C7. As we continue with plus signs, you can see those cells getting selected. And also check out the formula bar up above. You can see the formula being created up here. We can edit up there or right here in the cell. All right, C6 plus C7, all we need now is C8 plus C9 and press enter. There's our answer, 10.51. The beauty of the formula is if we go back to Canada and realize we made a mistake here, it should be 3.95. All we have to do is click there and type 3.95. It'll type right over what's there, press enter, and check out the total. It gets updated automatically reflecting the change. So that's the beauty of the formula. But imagine if you had a long string of numbers, maybe all of the months for several years. You wouldn't want to be adding up cells with plus signs. So there's another way. Let's go to cell C11, click there, and hit your delete key on the keyboard. That removes the contents. What we're going to do now is use a function. Again, it starts with the equal sign, but this time we're going to use the sum function. There are many functions to choose from. When we type in sum, you can see a number of sum type functions appear on a dropdown. And the top one is highlighted, adds all the numbers in a range of cells. That's the one we want. The range has to be enclosed in round brackets. So we start with an opening round bracket. And now the range is actually C6 to C9. And we can type that in. Go ahead. Type in C6, a colon, and then C9, then a closing round bracket, and press enter. Notice how the whole range is highlighted or selected. We get the same answer, and when we click in cell C11, we see that answer up here on the formula bar is the formula or function that gives us that answer. So that's one option. There's an even faster way, believe it or not. Let's hit delete again. Try this, equals sum, open round bracket. Now just click and drag across those four cells. Notice the range gets typed in for you. You don't even have to know what the cells are. A closing round bracket and press enter. There's that same answer. And because all of these numbers are together, not separated by text or anything else, there's an even faster way. It's called the auto sum. Go back to cell C11, hit your delete key to remove the contents. And right there in cell C11, we're going to go up to the Formulas tab on the ribbon here, and you'll notice an Auto Sum button. The lower half is a drop-down. Click the lower half. You'll see other auto functions like average, counting numbers, maximum and minimums can be found in a string of cells. But when we click Sum or the top half of that button, watch what happens. Press Enter, and there's your answer. So what happened? Let's go back to cell C11. What's happening here is all of this gets typed for you. The auto sum function is looking for numbers. Nothing over here on the left, nothing to the right or below. Finds these numbers up above, takes all of them and totals them up for our answer. So if you check out the formula, it's C6 to C10. It included this blank cell. If we added something there, it would be included. If we added something we didn't want included, well, we'd have to go back and edit our formula, which we do up here in the formula bar. Just click after the 10, hit your backspace key a couple of times and change that 10 to a 9, press enter, and there you go. So by using formulas and functions, we can get the answers we're looking for. And there are many built-in functions to choose from here in Excel. The next step is to get the same thing done for February and March. And the easiest way to do that is to copy our formula and use relative addressing. That's all coming up next. When you add formulas or functions to your worksheet here in Excel 2019, odds are good you're going to need that formula elsewhere, such is the case with our leaf and mortar revenues sheet here, LM revenues 0105, if you're catching up. We just added the sum function here to cell C11. When we click in that cell, we see the answer, On the formula bar, it's the sum function that's summing up the numbers in the range C6 to C9. So we need to do that for February and March as well. And yes, we could go to cell D11 and fill in that cell with the appropriate function and range, which would be D6 to D9, and then go do it again over here for column E. But why repeat ourselves when Excel uses something by default known as relative cell addressing? That means if we come over here to cell C11 and copy this function or formula, and then paste it over here in column D, it's actually going to use the range D6 to D9. And if we paste it over here in cell E11, you got it, it'll use the range E6 to E9 for us. So we could come over here and copy this by going to the Home tab and clicking copy and then pasting in these cells. That would work. But there's a faster way. You may have noticed that no matter what cell you click, in the bottom right corner is a little green handle. And if we go to cell C11, we see it there. Moving our mouse around, we see a white cross. When we move over that handle, it changes to a black crosshair. That means we're ready to click and drag in the direction that we want to copy and paste the contents of that cell. So if we click and drag to the right 2 cells and release, look what happens. Very fast and easy, we get the correct totals for each of those cells. Let's go back to cell C11, click once. There's our function, sum, C6 to C9. When we now go to D11, sure enough, it's using the range D6 to D9. It knew if we're copying over a column to use the numbers in that column. Same thing here in cell E11. It's using the range E6 to E9 in the sum function. And that's why we get different answers, the correct answers for each of those columns. So keep in mind that Excel uses relative cell addressing when you copy and paste. It's going to save you a lot of time and a lot of repetition when you need to use formulas and functions in more than one cell. You know, Microsoft Excel is all about helping you work faster and easier, saving you time and effort as you build your workbooks. Well, we're going to look at a real nice time-saving feature that I use often. It's called autofill. And it's going to save you a lot of time when it comes to entering data into cells where there's a pattern. Let me show you what I'm talking about as we continue working with our Leaf and Mortar workbook, LM Revenues 0106 if you're catching up. Let's just go over here to an empty space and let's experiment with some things. Click in cell, say K5 here. Let's type in Monday. Press enter and type in Tuesday. Now we see a pattern. Does Excel? Yes, press enter to lock that in. Now select the 2 cells. Remember this little green handle in the bottom right corner we use for copying. Look what happens when we have a pattern and go to that little handle and click and drag straight down. You're going to see Wednesday popping up to the right, then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then if we keep going, it's going to start over at Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, all the way down again to Sunday if we wanted to, and release, and it's filled in for us. That just saved us a lot of typing, a lot of time, and a lot of effort. Well, let's delete it. Press your delete key with everything selected there, and let's click in that same cell at the top, K5. This time, let's use the short form for Monday, MON. Press enter. TUE, press enter. Will Excel pick this up? Let's click and drag over those 2. Go to the handle in the bottom right corner. When you see the black crosshair, click and drag straight down, and sure enough, when you release, the short forms of the days of the week. It also works for numbers. Hit your delete key, go back to K5. Let's type in 2010. Let's type in 2011. Is that enough? Click and drag over those 2 cells. Click and drag the handle in the bottom right-hand corner down, and we could go all the way to 2019, filling in those numbers thanks to the pattern recognized by Excel. That's what autofill is all about. Let's hit delete again to remove that. Could we use that somewhere in our worksheet? You bet. We have Jan, Feb, and Mar. Wouldn't it be nice to go all the way to December? Well, we can click and drag over those 3 cells from C4 to E4. There's that little green handle in the bottom right corner. When you see the black crosshair, click and drag across. It doesn't have to be up and down. It can be across as well. And when you see a little pop-up for DEC, the short form for December, release, and it's all filled in for us. Click anywhere in the background to deselect. So as you can see, autofill is going to be a nice time-saving feature. Once you've added text, numbers, and formulas or functions that perform calculations on those numbers, it might be time to make your worksheet look nice. It may not be all that pleasing to the eye using the defaults. Such is the case with our leaf and mortar revenue sheet here that we've been working with. And as you can see, I filled in the remaining figures, added some totals over here. You can get caught up with me by going to the Chapter 2 folder of your exercise files and opening up LM Revenues 0201. For example, check out the top left corner here where we see our title. It's barely noticeable using the default font, size, and attributes. So let's make some adjustments to the text in our worksheet. We'll start by going to cell A1. You may be tempted to click and drag across all the way to column E because it looks like that content fills up those cells. As you may recall, if there's nothing in the cells next to the contents that we entered here in cell A1, it simply overlaps those cells and is visible. If we were to add anything to cell B, C, D, or E1, it would get cut off. So clicking in cell A1 and looking at the formula bar shows us that everything's in cell A1. If we go to B1, there's nothing there. No point in formatting those empty cells. All we need to do is click cell A1 and start formatting. So let's go to the Home tab here, make sure it's selected on the ribbon, and focus in on the font group here. You can see the current font, you can see the current size, and then some buttons for making changes to attributes, color, fill, and of course the font face and size can be adjusted. Let's start with the font face by clicking the drop-down. Now your list of fonts could be different than mine depending on your installation, but there will be an alphabetical list down below. And as we scroll down, you can see that the font name uses the font face, so we get an idea of what it might look like. Also, as we hover over these different font faces, we can see in the background, right in behind our drop-down menu, changes being made to give us a real-time preview of what that might look like. So you might want to experiment. There are many to choose from. I'm going to go all the way back up to the top here and select Arial Black. Go ahead. So already now our title is standing out just by changing the font face. Let's go to the font size now. Currently set at 11, click the drop-down. You'll see a number of preset options to choose from. Next one is 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, and then it starts to jump up. Notice as we hover over these, we get a nice little real-time preview in the background again of what it could look like if we made that selection. Let's go to 12 and select it, just a little bit bigger. The other option is to bump it up using those intervals that we saw on the drop-down menu using the increase and decrease font size buttons. Let's bump it up. You can see the next one's 14. Click again. Goes up to 16, then 18, then 20. You realize that's too big. We go to the next button to decrease using those same intervals. Let's go all the way back down to 16. I think that looks good. Now this is the type of font where we probably don't need to do things like bold, italic, even underline this. It's standing out, but let's change the color. Over here, you'll see the capital letter A with the red underline. That's the font color button. And clicking this drop-down arrow will give you the palette. Now, what you're going to see at the top is automatic. That's currently the default what's being used, black. Then you'll see theme colors. The default theme being used here has a set of its own colors and shades of those colors down below. So as you hover over those, you get a real-time preview once again in the background of what that might look like. There are also standard colors. And if you want more colors, clicking more colors will give you full access to all the palettes. But let's just go with a nice dark green for leaf and mortar here. As you hover over this last green option in the last column, green accent 6, darker 50% is the pop-up displaying some information about that color. Go ahead and select it. It's applied to our entire title. Okay, let's go to our headings here. We see location, January, February, all the way over to totals. Maybe those should stand out a little bit. Maybe change the alignment as well because text is left aligned and the numbers right aligned. You can see it doesn't look all that pleasing to the eye. So we could go across here and click and drag to select everything we want to adjust. Or if it's the entire row, just simply click in the background to deselect and go to the row number. If we want everything in row 4, even things we add down the road to be formatted the way we want, we can select the entire row by clicking the number. Go ahead. Clicking the 4 selects the entire row all the way out to the very last column. Now any changes we make, like bolding, that looks good. Maybe bumping up the size to 12, looks pretty good. You can see anything we type in these empty cells now, just type your name, will also take on that formatting. And that's because we selected the entire row. The same thing goes for columns. We can select entire columns by clicking. You can even click and drag to get multiple columns. Click in the background to deselect, or multiple rows. But I think all we need to do is select the contents now down the left-hand side to format them. We'll format them the same as what we see across the top for the months of the year. Just select from A6 to A11, and we'll go up to the bold button, and we'll bump it up to 12, like so. Click in the background, and as you can see, it's already starting to look much nicer, a little bit easier to read as well. Let's go back to our months of the year and change their alignment. I think that'll fix things up even better. You'll notice when we select from cell C4 all the way to O4, we select just the contents we want to make adjustments to. If we wanted the entire row again, we could select 4, but I want to leave location left aligned. So let's go up to the alignment group now on the ribbon, and you'll see a number of different alignments for horizontal and vertical alignments. So I'm thinking maybe center might look better. Let's select center. You can see how things get moved over in the middle of the cell horizontally. We can even do it vertically by going up to the one above, middle align. We'll just bump it up slightly. Now, if for some reason this row expands in height, everything will be centered vertically and horizontally. Kind of like that better. Click in the background to see the end result, getting even easier to read now. Of course, we can do formatting with numbers. There are many more options there. We'll discuss those next. When it comes to formatting numbers here in Excel 2019, we have all of the formatting options we talked about when formatting text, but numbers also have their own formatting options, which we're going to explore in this movie with our Leaf and Mortar Revenues workbook, LM Revenues 0202, if you need to get caught up. So as we look down below, we can see there are a number of values, some from calculations, built-in functions and formulas, but they all seem to look the same. A number, a decimal. Some of them, however, do have more than 2 decimal places, depending on the calculation. Others, just the 2 as we entered them. So some formatting here is in order. Because we're looking at dollar amounts, for example, we might want to change the format of the number to display a dollar sign, for example. So let's select all of our numbers. That means clicking and dragging from cell C6 across and down to O11. That gets all of our numbers. Now we can format them all the same for a consistent look and feel. When we go up to the ribbon with the Home tab still selected, you'll notice there's a number group specific to number formatting. Click the drop-down where you see number, that's the default format, and you'll see some other presets to choose from. General has no specific formatting. Numbers will appear the way they're entered. Number is what we're currently looking at, simply a number, the decimal, and however many decimal places are needed. But with others like currency and accounting, you'll get a dollar sign and everything will show up with 2 decimal places. So there will be some rounding up and down with these 2 options. Let's try currency. Give it a click. You can see the dollar sign now appears, and those numbers that had 3 decimal places now have 2. Some are rounded up, some are rounded down. When we go back to the drop-down and choose accounting, you can see it's very similar, but the dollar sign's pushed off to the left-hand side. I like this better because it matches up a little better with our headings across the top, which are centered. And we can adjust alignment for all of our numbers as well if we wanted to. All of those text formatting options we discussed in the previous movie also apply to numbers. But I think the alignment's okay. Check out the number group one more time. Maybe it shouldn't be dollar signs. Perhaps it should be in euros or British pounds. We have those options and some others to choose from. We also have percentages, comma formatting, and there it is, the decimals. Let's click in the background to close up that menu. And perhaps this would look better with fewer decimal places, down to 1. We're talking about millions of US dollars here, so let's go to the 2 buttons, hover over them. The first one will increase the decimals. Give it a click, it's up to 3. Every one of them has 3 decimal places, so we see a lot of zeros. Click again, we get a 4th one. Let's go to the next button, though, to decrease the decimal. Click once, twice, we're back where we started, down to 2. Click again, and we're down to a single decimal place. Now click in the background, and that might make more sense when talking millions of US dollars. Again, there's going to be some rounding up and down of your numbers. Doesn't change the values. For example, if we go to cell D7 and look up at the formula bar, the value is still 3.05. It's displayed as 3.1 with a dollar sign based on the formatting options we've selected. The other thing we might want to do is get our totals standing out. So let's go ahead and click and drag across the bottom totals and go up to the font group here and bold those. And if we want, we can go to the totals over here in column O. Click and drag from 06 down to 09. Maybe bold and italicize. Click in the background to see what that looks like. It's a much more attractive looking workbook now that we've made some formatting changes to both text and numbers. On occasion, you may need to enter dates or even times into a sheet here in your Excel 2019 workbook. And in those cases, it's good to know they have their own formatting options, which we're going to explore with our Leaf and Mortar Revenues workbook. You can open up LM Revenues 0203 if you need to get caught up. Let's go to our title, click in cell A1, and let's change it slightly. Where it says Leaf and Mortar Revenues, click right in front of the R in Revenues and type Projected. And leave a space. Press enter, and we've updated our title. Now we want to put in the date that we projected these revenues. So in cell A2, if you're not already there, click there, and people type in dates different ways. You may like to use slashes or dashes. Maybe you do month, day, year, and I do day, month, year. Or maybe you use words, letters. Let's just type in a date one way and see what happens. Let's say we want to type in the 1st of November, 2018. Let's do it this way. 01 dash, type the short form NOV for November, a dash, and then we'll do 2018. That's one way to enter a date. Now press enter to lock that in, and let's see what happens. Well, it's changed. It's now 1-NOV-18. The 2 zeros gone. But click back in that cell, A2, and check out the formula bar. It appears as day, month, year, 11/1/2018, and we could have typed it in that way and got the same result. So what we type is not as important as how we format, and that can be done after the fact. So with cell A2 still selected, to change the way that date appears, we can go back to our number formatting group up here on the ribbon with the Home tab selected. Right now you'll see Custom. Click the drop down, and you'll see a couple of date preset options like short date. You can see that's going to display month, day, year with slashes the way it appears in the formula bar. Give it a click and it changes right here in cell A2. You may have noticed if you were looking, the column just got a little bit wider to accommodate the extra couple of digits. Dates are not going to overlap into empty cells like text does. The column is going to get as wide as it needs to get to accommodate the format we choose. We'll really see this happen when we go back to the drop down here in the number group and look at the long date. It's going to add the day of the week in there. The full spelling of November 1st, 2018. Go ahead and select it and look what happens to column A. It gets nice and wide to accommodate our date. Now, maybe you're thinking, I don't need the day of the week, but the rest looks good. There are more formats than those presets we saw. With cell A2 still selected, instead of going to the drop-down, let's go to the expansion arrow in the bottom right corner of the group here on the ribbon. Clicking this will actually open up the dialog for formatting cells. And automatically, because we're working with dates, the number tab is selected and the date category is selected on the category list. And you can see the current selection. Anything with an asterisk indicates that it's going to respond to changes in your regional date and time settings. So you may see asterisks next to different options than me, depending on your system settings. But it really doesn't matter. We can select from any of these. There's the slashes, just the day and the month without the year. Lots more options to choose from here than we saw from the drop-down list. And there's the one we're thinking of. There are some with times down there as well. If you wanted to insert times, you could do that too. But I'm thinking this one here, the type shows as March 14th, 2012. Selecting it will give us a sample up here of November 1st, 2018, how it's going to look. I like that better. Let's click OK. And you can see we've reformatted our date. It is right aligned, and we can change all of those things that we could apply to text and numbers here from the font group and the alignment group can also be applied to our date. So let's go to the left align button, moves it over to the left side of the cell. The column is still wider than it needs to be for that date based on the last format we selected, but that's okay. These are things we can adjust. Just click anywhere over here on your sheet to see what that looks like deselected. So while we can enter dates and even times, they all come with their own formatting as well. As you can see, they can also affect things like column widths. And if you look at our title here, which uses a larger font, this row height is a little bit bigger than the rest. These are things we can adjust manually as well to make our sheets more visually interesting in our workbooks. We'll talk more about that next. Another way to improve the visual appearance of your workbooks here in Excel 2019 is to make modifications to the rows and columns. Sometimes you'll need wider columns, sometimes you'll need taller rows, and sometimes you'll need extra columns and extra rows, sometimes you'll need to remove them. That's what we're going to explore in this movie with our Leaf and Mortar Revenues Workbook 0204 if you're catching up. Let's start with rows and columns. It can be tempting to add extra blank rows or extra columns to create extra space, but it's not necessary. And then sometimes it can complicate matters when you start adding and removing content. So let's start with columns. As you can see, we do have an extra column here. Column B has nothing in it. If we want to delete column B, we can select it by clicking the header right at the top, the letter B. And with it selected, there's a couple of things we can do. The long way is to go up here to the ribbon in the cells group. You'll see a delete button. Click the drop-down arrow, the bottom half, to see all the delete options. We don't want to delete cells. That's the contents of the cells. They're empty. But there is an option further down to delete the column. Delete sheet columns will do exactly that. Delete all the columns that are selected. If we selected 3, they'd all be deleted. In this case, it's just one empty column, column B, and when we click it, you can see everything moves over to the left a little bit, and now January data appears in what used to be an empty column. So it's still column B, the empty column has been removed. Same thing if we want to go down to row 10, select it. The shortcut is to actually right-click these things. So if we went up to column B and right-clicked, you can see there is a delete option. If we go over to an empty row like row 10 and right-click, it both selects it and gives us the pop-up menu where we can delete. Removes that blank row. And we could do the same up here. For example, 5. Right-click, delete. We have an extra one here. Right-click 3 and delete. Yes, everything's starting to look like it's all cramped together, but this is where we can start increasing things like column widths and row heights to create that space without adding empty rows and columns. So let's start right at the top. Already, our first row here looks a little bit taller than the rest because of the large font we selected for our title. We can create even more space by going in between rows. Notice when we go to row 1, we see that black arrow pointing to the right. But move down between 1 and 2, and it turns into a double arrow pointing up and down. That means you're ready to click and drag. Clicking and dragging down is going to increase the height, and you can see it in pixels, as well as the actual figure. When you release, you can see you've increased the height of that row. So at this point, we might want to go inside cell A1 where our title was typed and perhaps change the alignment so it uses the middle of this row, and that means going up to the alignment group and choosing a different vertical alignment. Middle align is going to bump it up a little bit, and you can see how we created that extra space without adding an extra blank row. Let's do the same here between November 1st, 2018 and our location. So if we go between 2 and 3, click and drag down to create a little extra space. Do the same thing, click in cell A2 and middle align that, maybe even move it up to the top. Yeah, that looks good. Click in the background to deselect and see what that looks like. All right, so we have our locations in here and maybe a little extra space between those headers, means going in between 3 and 4, clicking and dragging just a little bit, I think. And then if we wanted to go between 4 and 5 and do the same, that way we can leave everything lined up the way it is, but still create that extra space. Of course, the same thing can happen with our column widths. It happened automatically when we chose a much longer date format, but we can go in between to move column widths to the right to make them wider, or to the left to make them narrower. And here's a nice little shortcut. Double-click between any column or row to automatically size it to fit the largest item. For example, if we go over to A and B right in between and double-click, what do you think is going to happen? Go ahead. You can see now column A is much wider than it was because the largest item is our title. And now it all fits in the column, but everything's pushed way out here to the right. So let's go up to the undo button. Control-Z is your keyboard shortcut to bring that back. But it might work better for some of our other columns. And if we wanted to, we could go between B and C and double-click to see what happens. You can see how narrow that is. Things start to look a little bit squished. So again, if we go up to the undo button or use Control-Z, we'll set it back to the default where we started. This is looking pretty good. If we need extra rows or extra columns, again, the easiest way is to right-click. For example, maybe we do need an extra row up here where we can add quarters. So let's right-click right on the 3 and choose Insert this time. Everything gets pushed down and a new row is inserted. And that can be adjusted as well just by going in between and clicking and dragging. So I think up here above February, we could type something in like Q1. Then we could go over to May and type in Q2. And then let's go over to August for Q3, kind of in the center. We'll go over to November and type in Q4. And we'll select those and format them. I think they should be centered, also in the middle, and bolded like so. Maybe even a little bit bigger than the others. Let's bump it up to 14. Click in the background to deselect. So as you can see, we have full control over our rows, their heights, the number of rows. We can easily remove and add them. Same thing goes for columns and their widths. Adding and removing columns, the easiest way is to go up to the top and use that right-click option. Otherwise, you're going up to the cells group for inserting and deleting rows and columns. I mentioned earlier how you have a lot of room on every single sheet you create in a workbook here in Excel 2019, over 1 million rows, and actually over 16,000 columns. Now, you may never fill up a sheet, but you may create and add enough content that you can no longer see it all in one screen. And when you start using the scroll bars to scroll off to the right or scroll down, you may lose your way, not knowing exactly what you're looking at. That's because labels down the left-hand side may disappear. Labels across the top may disappear. There is a tool to help you with that. It's called freezing panes, and that's what we're going to explore with our leaf and mortar workbook here, LM Revenues 0205, if you're catching up. The first thing we're going to do is zoom in. This is also a helpful feature when you're zoomed into content. Down the bottom right-hand corner, we see the zoom slider. Let's click the plus sign a few times. And you can see when we get up to around 150, 160%, it's easier to read the content, but all of a sudden, we no longer see the labels down the left, so we're not sure what the data is that we're looking at unless we use the scroll bar to go back, and sure enough, there's the locations. And then we move off to the right, and again, we lose those labels. If we scroll down as well, now we're just looking at numbers. We have no idea what they relate to. So here's where we can start freezing panes. And there's a few different options. Let's scroll all the way to the top and all the way to the left. When we go up to the View tab here and click it, the View ribbon contains some options for, there it is, freezing panes. This is a drop-down, and this gives us 3 different options. Go ahead and give it a click. Let's skip the first one to see that we can freeze the top row. That means we'll always be able to see the top row no matter how far down we scroll. Well, in our worksheet here, you can see that's just the title, Leaf and Mortar Projected Revenues. We could also freeze the first column, meaning no matter how far to the right we scroll, we'll always be able to see the contents of column A, and that would work in our scenario. But we want both. So in that case, we're looking at something called freeze panes. If we go to freeze first column and click there, you're going to see a faint line in between columns A and B. And that means now as we scroll off to the right, we see the data, and notice how column A stays put. We can always see what we're looking at here and line it up with the appropriate location. But if we scroll down, we lose sight of the months of the year and the quarters. So we actually need to use two options at once, and that's where freeze panes comes in handy. Click it again up here on the ribbon, and this time choose unfreeze panes to deselect what we chose a moment ago, and that is to freeze the first column. And instead, we want to freeze column A, but we also want the first 4 rows. So you can see rows 1, 2, 3, and 4 take us down to cells that contain labels for January through December and our quarters. So all you need to do is click below and to the right of what you always want to see. I always want to see the contents of column A. That means I'm moving over to column B. I always want to see the top 4 rows, so that means clicking in row 5. That's cell B5. That's where I want to freeze things, above and to the left. Now when we go back to freeze panes and click that drop down and choose freeze panes at the top, we'll be freezing the top 4 rows and our first column because of where we clicked before we went here. Go ahead. Now you can see the faint line between columns A and B, but also between rows 4 and 5, which means if we scroll down, we always see January, February, March, etc. And as we go to the right, we always see the locations. Sometimes when working with large amounts of numerical data in a workbook here in Excel 2019, it can be difficult just to look at the numbers and understand what's going on, to pick up on trends, for example. In that case, you want a visual representation of your data, and that means inserting charts. That's what we're going to do with our leaf and mortar revenues workbook here. 0206 if you're catching up. The first thing we're going to do, if you've been following along, we zoomed in here to freeze panes. We're going to zoom back out from the View tab on the ribbon, click the 100% button to zoom right back out. Now, there are many different types of charts with many powerful features and functions. We could do a whole course just on charts. In this movie, we're going to focus on something called recommended charts, where Excel will actually pick out the types of charts that will work with the data you want to display. Let me show you what I'm talking about. We'll start with our figures for Q1 and the United States only. So we'll click and drag from cell A6 across to D6. So we're getting United States and the figures for January, February, and March. Now we want to show that in a chart. We go up to the Insert tab and check out the Charts group. There's lots to choose from here. But there's also a button labeled Recommended Charts. Give that a click. It's going to show you a selection of charts that will work with the data you've selected. In this case, our Q1 data for the United States. In this case, a single row of data. You can see there's only a few options here, like our clustered column and bar charts. There's a line chart. And check it out, a pie chart will work with a single row of data and the funnel chart down at the bottom. Let's click Cancel. We change our mind. We want to get the visual representation of the data for Q1 for all of our locations. In that case, we'll click and drag from A4 across and down to D8. We don't want the totals, just the figures for each location. Now when we go back to recommended charts and click, we'll see a different selection. There's clustered column, but there's also a stacked version of that, and an area and line chart. And as we scroll further down, some other types of charts. We don't see pie chart here. That wouldn't work for the type of data we've selected. There's scatter and bubble charts here as well, even the funnel down at the bottom. Let's scroll all the way back up to the top. This one, when we select it, gives us a nice preview of what it's going to look like. There's our 4 locations and the color codes for January, February, and March. All we have to do is click OK, and it's inserted right there in the top left corner of our sheet. Now we can go to the handles down at the bottom right-hand corner, for example, and click and drag to resize this. It is an object. We can go inside near the border. When you see the 4-sided arrow, click and drag to move it down. Maybe under Q1 here would be a good spot for it. And the only thing we really need to do is give our chart a title. It says Chart Title. Click. Click again to get inside the object, and then click and drag over the 2 words Chart Title to type in our own. How about projected revenues and a dash, and let's do Q1 2019, like so. Just click in the background to see what that looks like. Pretty good. There's lots of things we can do with this chart. Go ahead and click once inside. You can see the handles again around the outside. It shows you the shaded areas, the data that's being used down below. There are also some chart styles, and you can see the one that's selected right at the beginning, but we can try different ones that include labels with numbers. Just hover over these to get a feel for what it's going to look like until you see one that you like better than the originally selected option. That's kind of cool with the dark background. But I think this one's going to work out nicely, style 6. We'll just give it a click in the background, and there's our chart. So when you're not sure what type of chart is going to work best with the data you've selected and want to view in a visual or data representation that's easy to understand, remember recommended charts will always steer you in the right direction. As you continue to create your own workbooks here in Excel 2019, at some point you may want to share them with others. You may want to share read-only versions with others so they can view the contents. Or perhaps you want them to be able to edit the contents, even collaborate with you online simultaneously. These are all options we're going to explore in this chapter, and we'll do it with our Leaf and Mortar Projected Revenues workbook, LM Revenues 03 from the Chapter 3 folder if you're catching up. Now, the first step in sharing online is to save your workbook somewhere online, i.e. the cloud. You'll notice in the top right corner, if you're signed in, your name will appear up here, your credentials. If you're not, you'll see a link to get signed in to a Microsoft account. It could be a personal account like an old Hotmail or Windows Live account, Outlook.com. In an organization that uses Exchange or SharePoint services, you may be connected online to one of those cloud storage locations. All you have to do is save your workbook to one of those locations, and you'll be able to send out invitations to people to access your file. So how do we do that? Well, there's a couple of different options. We can go to File and down to Share here on the left-hand side. Clicking that shows that we can share with people if we first save to the cloud. Let's hit the back button. There's also a Share tab in the top right corner. Click there. That opens up the Share pane with a button to Save to Cloud. You can't collaborate with others until you do that first and make sure it's saved as an XLSX file, which ours is. And of course, you can just simply yourself go up to File, choose Save As, and choose one of those locations if you're connected. What I see here are 2 SharePoint options and my own personal OneDrive. So all I have to do is choose one of these. If you have one of these options, go ahead and select it. I'm going to go to my own personal OneDrive and choose my Documents folder. It's going to open up the Save As dialog, which I could have done as well. File, Save As, and then browse to one of my online locations. You can see under OneDrive, I have a lot of subfolders, for example. And you can create your own new folders as well. I'm going to go up here to the very top, OneDrive, and create a new folder. And I'm going to call this Sharing and press Enter to lock it in. Click the Open button to open it up. It's empty. I'm going to keep the same name for my file or workbook that I'm sharing and click Save. So now that it's saved online, some things start to change. First of all, in the top left-hand corner, the Save button looks different. That circular set of 2 arrows is there to remind me that this is saved to the cloud. That means if I go over here to Share, it's going to look different now. The Share pane doesn't say Save to Cloud anymore. It has been. Now it has a field for inviting people, choosing what kind of access they'll have, messages, etc. It also shows me as the owner of this, and now I'm ready to share with other people. I can access my address book and contacts that are there, or type in email addresses. I'm going to type in Karen Leslie, who has a Gmail account. I'm going to let her edit. The other option, clicking this drop-down arrow, is View Only. So she'll be able to look at this but not make changes. With Can Edit, she'll be able to go in. Even if she doesn't have Excel installed on her end, she can use an online version. And optionally, I can include a message, something like, "Hi Karen, please edit as you see fit." Now, I wouldn't say that if I hadn't chosen Can Edit up here for the type of access. All we have to do now is click Share, and you can see emails are getting sent out. She shows up on the list down below me as someone who can edit. I can add more people at any time. You can go to people, right-click their name to remove them if you no longer want to share with them. But I do. I'm going to close up the share pane, clicking the close button. And I would continue working on this, knowing that Karen can also access it. Let's see what it's like to be her. I'm going to switch over to a browser where Karen's logged in and has received a message from David Rivers. I shared a file on OneDrive. Clicking this opens it up. Hi, Karen, please edit as you see fit, and a View in OneDrive button to open it up online. You can see a new tab opens up in her browser with Excel Online displaying the exact same workbook. Now, up here is a button to edit right here in the browser or download a copy of it. Lots of different options printed out. But if she wanted to go in here and make changes right now, just viewing, clicking Edit in Browser would give her access from Excel Online. It's not full Excel functionality, but it's enough to go in and change up any numbers that need changing. Meanwhile, switching back to Excel, I would see those changes happening, and from the Share tab, see who's making them, who has access, and what type of access, all because we can share online. Just one of the ways that you may want to share or even collaborate with others here in Excel 2019. Another popular way to share an Excel workbook is to send it via email as an attachment. Well, the nice thing is here in Excel 2019 is you don't have to leave the application, launch your email application, start a new message, then go to the attachment button, find your file, attach it, send it, etc. You can do it all from Excel. That's what we're going to do with our Leaf and Mortar Revenues 03 here from the Chapter 3 folder of your exercise files. First, we'll go up to File, then we'll select Share, and from here, click Email. Here's a cool thing. When we send it as an attachment in an email, it can be sent as an Excel file. So everyone gets a copy to review. It is an Excel workbook as they receive it at their end. However, if you wanted to just send them a PDF version, a read-only copy, you can choose to convert it on the fly as a PDF. That would happen. It would get attached and sent to the people you choose. Same thing for XPS, the Microsoft version of a read-only file. And then down below, you can even send it as an internet fax if you're using a fax service provider. No fax machine required. If this file is stored in the cloud, you can even just send a link via email, and people can click the link to get to your online version of the file. So let's choose Send as PDF and see what happens. In the background, something's happening. The default email application for me, Microsoft Outlook, is launched. You can see a new message has started. There's already a file attached, and it's a PDF file. It was converted and attached on the fly. All I have to do is type in who I'm sending it to, maybe Karen Leslie again, and add a message if I wanted to. Here's the file I mentioned. David. Clicking Send sends off the PDF version of this file via email. Persons receiving it at the other end will be able to open it up using Adobe Acrobat, for example, or even view it in their browser. Something else happened on screen here. You can see a dotted line indicating where the page breaks are. Because it has been converted to a PDF file, it's going to appear in multiple pages. The same thing that would happen if we were to print this. We'll do that next. If you decide you want a hard copy of your Excel workbook, you'll want to know some of the options available when it comes to printing. That's what we're going to explore in this movie with our Leaf and Mortar Projected Revenues Workbook, LM Revenues 03. First, we'll go up to File and then down to Print. Select that, and you'll see some print options and a preview of what's about to be printed using the default set of options that are currently selected. You can see actually there are 2 pages. We can scroll down to see page 2, or we can use the navigation arrows down here to go from page 1 to 2. This might make more sense if it were in landscape mode and maybe squeezed down to fit on a single page. So over here on the left where we see the big print button, we're not ready to print quite yet. Down below is where you select your printer, and your options may vary from mine depending on the printer and type of printer you're working with. Down below, you can see under settings, we can choose active sheets, so only the sheets that we're currently working on, the entire workbook, which could have multiple sheets, or a selection. If we'd gone ahead and selected an area, we could actually print just that selection. We didn't. So we're going to leave it at active sheet, the sheet we were on, our one and only sheet in our current workbook. You can see printing one-sided is an option, collated. Here's where we choose the orientation, currently set to portrait. Let's go down here and switch it to landscape orientation. Now our preview looks a little bit better. Still 2 pages and not quite fitting. So if we hit the arrow, you can see just November and December and our totals are not quite fitting on our first page. But as we scroll down a little bit further, we could change the paper size. For example, if we went to legal 8.5 by 14, I bet it would fit. And sure enough, it does. But if that's not an option, let's go back to our paper size and switch back to 8.5 by 11, still in portrait mode. Another way to make more room could be to change the margins, currently set to 0.7 on the left and right. Clicking this gives you access to some narrow options like 0.25 on the left and right, and custom margins if you want to set your own. I'm going to go to narrow, and still I'm missing December and the totals. That's where scaling comes in. Down below you can see with no scaling, we see it in actual size. Click the drop down. Here we have some fitting options. Fit sheet on one page. All columns on one page. If it goes on and on with the number of rows, which ours doesn't, then you'd at least be able to see all of the columns and have multiple pages for the extra rows. The opposite can be done as well, fitting all rows on a page as opposed to the columns. Let's fit this sheet all on one page. By clicking it, it's going to be scaled down ever so slightly to fit within our currently selected margins. That looks good. When you're ready, you click the print button to send it off to your printer with the number of copies you need. Hit the back button when you're done to return to your workbook. So, when you do need a hard copy of your workbook, remember there are a number of print options to help you make it fit properly on the type of paper and page you're working with. Well, congratulations, you've reached the end of this course on learning Excel 2019. You now have the foundation of Excel knowledge you need to feel comfortable creating your own spreadsheets and performing some basic calculations and formatting with this powerful spreadsheet program. Now, if you feel like you're ready to take things to the next level with Excel, LinkedIn Learning has you covered. Check out Excel 2019 Essential Training, a course that will take you way past the basics we've covered here in Excel, diving deeply into many more of the powerful features and functions of Excel 2019. And stay tuned to LinkedIn Learning for more advanced Excel 2019 courses to get you up to speed with advanced formulas and functions, charts and graphs, pivot tables, and a whole lot more. Thanks for watching.